The frequency of rust. The floodlights at Kestrel Park have not held a live current since 1994. The utility company severed the feed 3 years after the stadium closed, and the substation that once fed it was demolished in 2003 to make way for a parking structure that was never built. There is, by every available record, no way for electricity to reach those 4 rusting towers of glass and steel. And yet, every year, on the same 11 nights, they flicker. It started with a groundskeeper's report, filed and forgotten in a municipal archive. He described the lights coming alive at 9:47 p.m., pulsing in short, uneven bursts, then dying again before dawn. The report was stamped, filed under vandalism, unconfirmed, and left to gather dust for 30 years, until someone with a passing knowledge of telegraphy noticed the pattern in the groundskeeper's own hand-drawn timing chart. What he had recorded, without knowing it, was Morse code. We didn't believe it either, not at first. Old stadium lights don't spell things out. But when we set up a photodiode rig 50 meters from the North Tower and let it run through a full cycle, the data didn't lie. Long, short, short. Pause. Short, long. Pause. It repeated with the discipline of a machine that had been given one message and instructed never to stop sending it. We ran the translation twice, on 2 separate machines, because the first result seemed like a mistake. It wasn't. The lights were broadcasting a string of numbers, followed by 3 words, "Coming back tonight." The numbers turned out to be coordinates. Not of the stadium itself, but of a single seat in section 114, row 12, seat 8. We checked the seating chart from the stadium's final season, cross-referenced against a box score that still exists in a newspaper archive from the town's now-defunct daily. That seat belonged, on the night of the championship game in the autumn of 1994, to a man named Walter Renner, a broadcast engineer who had worked the stadium's press box for 11 years. Walter Renner never left the stadium that night. His body was never found. The official record states he was last seen in the second intermission, checking a signal cable near the auxiliary transmitter behind the north stands, during what witnesses described as an unusually violent electrical storm that rolled in without warning over the open field. When the storm passed, the game resumed. Walter did not return to his post. No trace of him, no wallet, no equipment, no scrap of clothing, was ever recovered, despite a search that lasted 6 days. The stadium closed for good 4 years later, ostensibly for structural reasons. The official inspections cited corroded support beams and a failing drainage system. But the engineer who signed that report, when we located him, now in his 80s, living 2 towns over, told us something the report never mentioned. He said that during his inspection, every clock in the press box was running 14 minutes fast, and no amount of resetting would correct them. He said the broadcast booth held a smell like ozone, even on days when there had been no storm for weeks. He said he never went back inside after that, and that he told the demolition crew 26 years ago the building should have come down immediately, not been left standing to rot. Nobody listened to him, then either. We went in on the 9th night of the pattern 3 days ago, with a research permit and equipment we hoped would explain the impossible current running through those towers. What we found first was not electrical. It was atmospheric. Every device we carried, 3 separate watches, 2 phones, a handheld GPS unit, began drifting out of sync the moment we crossed the threshold of the outer gate. Not randomly, uniformly. All of them gained the same 14 minutes within the first hour, exactly matching what the old engineer had described 3 decades earlier, as though the building itself kept its own private clock and demanded that anyone who entered surrender to it. The broadcast booth was worse. The door had rusted half open, and the smell hit us before the light did. A sharp, metallic tang, like the air after a lightning strike, except the sky outside was clear and had been for a week. Our electromagnetic field meter, which had read a flat baseline the entire walk-in, spiked the instant we stepped inside, then held steady at a level our equipment wasn't designed to explain. Not the erratic burst of faulty wiring, but a smooth, sustained hum, as if something in that room were still transmitting, and had been for 31 years without pause. On the console, beneath 3 decades of dust, sat a logbook, open to a page dated the night of the championship. The handwriting on it was Walter's, confirmed against payroll records from the stadium archive. The final entry described the storm, the flickering of the auxiliary lights, and a sound he called a signal underneath the signal, bleeding through his headset from a source he could not locate. The last line, written in a hand that had begun to shake, read only, "If it repeats 3 times, I have to answer it." The entry stops mid-sentence. There is no period. There is no next page. We stayed in that booth longer than we should have. It was there, standing over Walter's final unfinished sentence, that the floodlights outside came on without anyone touching a switch, and through the cracked window overlooking the field, we watched them begin their pattern again, the same one we'd already decoded a dozen times over. But this time, when we clocked it against our own watches, the one still 14 minutes fast, the countdown embedded in the sequence read differently. It wasn't counting toward a distant future date anymore. It was counting down from 6 hours, and it had started the moment we walked into that room. We left. We are not ashamed to say that. We packed our equipment, and on the way out, every clock we carried snapped back to the correct time the instant we crossed the outer gate, as though the building let go of us the same way it must have let go of nothing else in 31 years. The lights are still flickering tonight, on schedule, on the 11th night of this year cycle. We are watching the feed from outside the fence, because none of us are willing to go back in before the countdown reaches 0. If the pattern holds the way it has every year before this one, the sequence will end sometime near midnight, and the floodlights will fall dark again for another 11 months. But this year, for the first time since we began recording, there is a second signal layered beneath the first, faint, almost lost in the noise, translating to something that isn't a warning at all. It reads like a request. 3 words, repeated in a loop that has not broken once in the 6 hours we've been monitoring it. Let me out. We don't know whose voice that message belongs to anymore. Walter Renner has been gone for 31 years. But something in that broadcast booth has kept transmitting on his frequency the entire time, counting down towards some threshold none of us fully understand. And tonight, for reasons we cannot explain, the countdown is shorter than it has ever been before. We will be watching when it reaches 0. We do not know what happens after that. Neither, it seems, did Walter.